Every year, I take a look back at my favorite roller coasters that I've ridden throughout my life and try to piece together a list of my 25 favorites, which now that I've ridden over 700 different roller coasters, it becomes quite a challenge. And when there's only 25 spots, it means only the best of the best are able to make it. We are talking about literally 4% of all the roller coasters I've ridden. And because my opinions are constantly changing, and so that's why if you compare this year's list to last year's, you'll notice a lot of the same rides are there, however the orders have been shifted around a little. Not for any particular reason other than maybe I had one ride experience that I was like, that ride wasn't as good as I remembered, I'm going to push it back a little. Or vice versa, where now I'm really going to move it up. Now I rode over 100 new roller coasters last year, however only 2 of them were good enough to crack my top 25, which of course meant that 2 roller coasters from last year's list had to get booted. Those 2 rides were Shambhala at PortAventura and Twisted Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I still enjoy both of those rides, but with a video like this, you gotta make some tough decisions, and unfortunately, those were the 2 that got the boot. So just keep in mind when you're watching this video that all of these rides, in my opinion, are a 10 out of 10. They're all fantastic, and as you watch this, I think you'll be able to notice the type of rides that I enjoy. A lot of these rides are by very different manufacturers, however, the ride experiences have similar factors such as intensity, airtime, specifically ejector airtime, steep drops, great pacing, rapid fire transitions. These are the type of things that I prefer in a roller coaster. That doesn't mean that's what is the best element in a ride, it's just the ones I happen to enjoy the most. So you'll notice that a lot of one-trick ponies don't quite make this list, even though rides like Kingda Ka and Top Thrill Dragster are great experiences. At the end of the day, the rides that stand out to me the most are some of the ones that feature those characteristics. So just keep that in mind as you're watching this video. With that all being said, let's jump right in. Number 25, we have Gold Striker at California's Great America. This is a GCI twister layout. The elements never stop coming. You fly through the layout, very smooth for a wooden roller coaster, and leaves you in a position where you're like, wow, I just want to get right back on that thing. And that will not be the only GCI roller coaster to make this list. GCI in general just does some fantastic creations, and this is by far one of the best they've ever done. But up next, we have a ride that is located at my home park, Kings Dominion. This is Twisted Timbers. It is an RMC transformation of Hurler. This was an old sucky wooden roller coaster that they gave a huge makeover to, added in inversions, lots of airtime. I've had the opportunity to get a lot of different runs on this thing, and it's just good fun, really enjoyable creation. Not the tallest, not the fastest, but RMC really made good use of that layout that they had to work with. At the number 23 spot, we have Karnen at Hansa Park in Germany. And this ride is all sorts of messed up. It is my favorite roller coaster by Gerstlauer, and for a good reason. This thing is very intense. It is over 200 feet tall, has an enclosed drop, and lots of tricks up its sleeve. It's very well themed. You hardcore gray out on it every single time, and the pacing is just unbelievable. It flies through that layout. By far one of Europe's best roller coasters. And up next, we have a very interesting roller coaster. Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm is a CCI layout that had been redone by GCI, and so it features the best of both worlds. It feels like a GCI with a CCI layout. So it has lots of laterals, airtime, and great pacing, but it features GCI trains, it's very smooth, and it gives an incredible night ride. This is one of my favorite roller coasters on the West Coast. I'm a huge fan of this thing, and it's definitely one that you won't want to miss. Just one spot ahead of it is Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood in Pennsylvania. This is one of my all-time favorite hypercoasters. It is very unconventional. The ride was originally an Arrow and then got most of its track ripped up with new Morgan track put in place that had a completely different layout. So now instead of focused on inversions, it's focused on speed. And this thing is fast. And because of the restraints, you get some crazy ejector airtime, especially towards the end of the ride. And one of the things people always talk about with this creation is how the second drop is bigger than the first drop, so it really uses the terrain to its advantage. Taking the number 20 spot is Mystic Timbers. This is my favorite GCI roller coaster. Unlike a lot of their creations, this one features an out and back layout. It weaves through the woods, stays very low to the ground, and the pacing is just fantastic. When this thing flies, it flies, and you will get some great airtime on this thing. A lot of people love to make fun of the shed, but to me, I don't really care about that. I look at the layout, and the fact is, this is a phenomenal layout. So now we're at the number 19 spot, and next we have Iron Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. I haven't ridden this thing since 2016, so it's tough for me to say whether I would enjoy this thing as much as I did when I first initially rode it, because it has been quite a while, and most of these coasters I've ridden multiple times, and Iron Rattler, I only did a couple. However, when I did ride it, I I very much enjoyed it. I still think it has one of the best drops on an RMC. A backseat ride on this thing is like nothing else. And taking the 18th spot is Terran at Phantasialand. This ride is crazy. The layout is focused less on airtime and more just rapid transitions, diving in and out of trenches through crazy theming. I mean, this has some of the best theming in the world. It is absolutely mesmerizing to watch just from off the ride. Then you're on it and you have no idea what is about to come next. And I'm grateful that I'm able to get back on it later this year to ride it again. So who knows, maybe this time next year this ride will be a lot higher up on this list. We don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Another Intamin launch coaster is taking the 17th spot. This is Maverick, and while this does not have the crazy theming that Terran has, I think this is a really strong layout. It whips through those inversions, all those crazy transitions. I tell you, there's nothing like that second launch. When you're already going at a pretty good pace, you slow to a stop and then just shoot off to go through the second half of that ride. If you ever visit Cedar Point, do not miss this ride. At number 16, we have Wicked Cyclone at Six Flags New England. And like Iron Rattler, this is one that I didn't have the opportunity to ride as much as I would have liked to. I haven't ridden it since 2017, but it was running great the one time that I visited. I was able to get lots of different rides on it, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. It's a heck of an improvement over the original Cyclone roller coaster it replaced. This is a smaller RMC with a tighter layout, but really makes good use of the space, which is why this is my favorite roller coaster in the New England region of America. And just barely outdoing it is Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. This is by far one of the most aggressive roller coasters I have ever ridden. Like Wicked Cyclone, this ride is not huge, however it makes a heck of a use out of that layout. Twisted Twins was a dual track wind roller coaster. This ride combined the two sides into one ride, and I don't know how Kentucky Kingdom greases their wheels or whatever, but whenever I go there, this thing is flying and is absolutely ridiculous. I'm a big fan of this coaster. And for the third RMC in a row, next up we have Railblazer. This is their single rail prototype track. It opened in 2018, is a mirror image of Wonder Woman Gold Lasso coaster, which I have not ridden. However, absolutely, I think what I'm about to say applies to that ride. This thing flies. I could not believe how fast it went through that layout. And if this really was RMC's first take at the Raptor track, I cannot wait to see what they do next, because this ride really blew me away. There's nothing like riding solo, hugging the single rail track as you whip around these tight turns and inversions. Fantastic experience. And something kind of funny, Railblazer is one of the only rides on this list that has not moved at all. In last year's list, it was also at number 14. And funny enough, the next ride also did not move from last year's list. Number 13 is still Expedition G-Force at Holiday Park. This is the ride that I wish Millennium Force was, which you'll notice Millennium Force is not on this list. This is the coaster that I've always said does everything Millennium Force does, but so much better. It has great airtime, a really strong layout flying through the trees, and it really just wowed me. I went in with a bit lower expectations thinking, it's probably overrated. But no, I really enjoyed this roller coaster. It is enough reason alone to go to Holiday Park. And just one spot ahead is another crazy Intamin roller coaster. This is Intimidator 305, and I have a soft spot for this roller coaster. I've ridden it more than any other ride in the world. I love this thing to bits. Sure, the ride does not wow me as much as it did the first time I rode it, but it's still one of the most intense roller coasters I've ever ridden. It is absolutely ridiculous how high this thing is, and then how it goes through the rest of the layout extremely low to the ground. There's nothing else like it. So now we're at the number 11 spot, and let me tell you, this ride has gone through a roller coaster of emotions for me, because when I first rode X2, I did not like it at all. However, here it is taking the number 11 spot on my list. Talk about a ride that has grown on me. Sure, if you sit on an outside seat, it's pretty rough, but this is still one of the most demented rides I think in existence. Staring face down at the ground going through that first drop and then rotating throughout the rest of the layout is just insane. It's not a perfect ride. I mean, this was the coaster that made Arrow go bankrupt, but I can't get enough of it. Anytime I go to Magic Mountain now, this is just one of those rides that I just want to stay on and lap and cheer as I go through the layout, because it's just so crazy. Talk about a ride that will wow you. So now we've made it to the top 10, and at the number 10 spot we have Sky Rush at Hershey Park. This is, in my opinion, the greatest steel coaster Intamin's ever done. You start off with a bang with an incredibly fast lift hill, go through the first drop, which I've always said feels like a freaking car crash, but in the best way possible. The layout is so intense, so fast paced, and while a lot of people don't like the restraints, they've never particularly bothered me. This is just one of those coasters that you get off and you're like, how does this thing exist? How is this allowed? How do people like this? Because it's definitely not for everyone, but I can't get enough of it. In the single digits now, next we have Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City. This was the first ever wind roller coaster to go upside down 3 times. times, and like several other RMCs, it makes great use of the terrain, flying through the backwoods of the Ozarks, and pacing wise, this RMC is insane. More times than not, this thing is hauling the mail, and also has one of the best endings for any roller coaster, going through that double barrel roll into the brake run. Freaking crazy. Just one spot above it is Fury 325, the tallest Giga coaster in the world, and the only B&M coaster on my list. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And I was thinking about that. Why is this the only B&M coaster that makes my top 25? First of all, I do think it is definitely the best coaster B&M has ever done. It is just great fun. It is so re-rideable. You get off of it and just want to go and just lap this thing all day. It features some of the best elements that B&M's incorporate onto a roller coaster. Not to mention the thing is just beautiful. I mean, look at this thing. So photogenic. So again, not that I don't like B&M. I'm a big fan of some of their other rides, but for the type of elements that I look for in roller coasters, a lot of B&Ms just don't have that. But Fury, to an extent, does, which I think is pretty cool. At number 7, we have Wildfire at Kolmarden. This is one of those rides that has dropped a few spots, not because I've loved it any less. In last year's list, I had it at number 3, but like I said, my opinions change. I still think this ride is absolutely phenomenal, and it gives probably the greatest view of all time from a lift hill. And the way it flies through the trees of Sweden, up and onto the cliffside, it is a fabulous creation. I believe I rode it like 17 or 18 times in one day, and I couldn't get enough of it. Made going to Sweden at all worth it. And just barely missing the top 5 is The Voyage at Holiday World. And I know a lot of people who this roller coaster is their favorite of all time, and for good reason. This ride is insane. It is ridiculously long. It never lets up. Pacing is unbelievable. It feels like it's getting faster as the ride goes on, which doesn't make any sense. And tons of airtime. It really has the best of everything. First half feels like a hypercoaster. Second half feels like an RMC before RMC was even a thing. Gravity Group knocked our socks off with this ride. In my opinion, this is by far one of the greatest wind roller coasters ever built. So now we've made it to our top 5, which brings us to one of the new roller coasters to make my top 25. This is Ed Janaica at Fuji-Q Highland. Holy frick, this thing is insane. It is so much to handle, but I got off of it and I could not believe what I just rode. And I said this in the review, but I have never laughed more on a roller coaster in my life than on Ed Janaica for the first time. It is everything I wanted X2 to be and more. So you saw X2 made number 11, still phenomenal ride, like 10 out of 10. But Ed Janaica feels like an 11. I wish this ride were a lot closer to me, but I'm so glad I had the chance to experience it because I freaking love this ride. Definitely go back and watch that review I did of this thing. I go way more in depth into it, as well as all the other roller coasters that are on this list. I have reviews of them, but especially this one. I mean, man, there's a lot to talk about. But we don't have time for that because we got to talk about the number 4 spot, which is Hakuge, the second new roller coaster that I rode this past year that was able to secure a spot in my top 25. This was my favorite roller coaster in Japan. It is definitely one of RMC's best creations. It is a redo of White Cyclone, which I did not have the chance to experience, but let me tell you, Hakuge is freaking phenomenal. POVs do not do it justice. So much airtime, pacing is unbelievable, and unlike a lot of RMCs, I actually preferred this ride in the front row instead of the back, which I thought was interesting. Not to mention it's just beautiful. I mean, look at this thing. Wow, what a gorgeous coaster. So up next, we're at our top 3, and I've really thought a lot about this. This whole list was really tough for me, but especially coming up with the top 3, I could not figure out how I wanted to place these rides, but this is what I came up with. At number 3, we have Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point in Ohio. When I first rode this thing, it caught me so off guard how long the ride is, how many different elements it packs in, and the sheer amount of airtime. It really is a masterpiece, especially the second half of the ride when it's weaving in between the structure. It always takes my breath away every time I ride it, and while a lot of people will make the argument that this is the greatest roller coaster ever built, at the end of the day, the reason why I moved it is because I was really trying to think about what is the difference between greatest and favorite. I think there's still arguments to be made that Steel Vengeance is the greatest roller coaster out there. However, I still have a soft spot for 2 other rides that I decided to place ahead of this, both of which are wooden roller coasters, so maybe this is the best steel coaster out there. But the 2 rides I placed above it, first off is El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey. I have always been a humongous fan of this ride. It is absolutely insane. Some of the greatest airtime you'll ever experience. Ridiculously intense. Pacing top notch. And while it may not be as long as Steel Vengeance, there's just something about it that I just love riding it so much. I really wish Intamin did more of these type of rides because everything about this roller coaster is just phenomenal. So what do I have at the number 1 spot? Ladies and gentlemen, I have put Lightning Rod at Dollywood at the number 1 position. But not just any Lightning Rod. My number 1 coaster of all time is Lightning Rod when it was running at full speed before they slowed down the launch. So now this coaster does not run quite as fast as it used to, which is a shame. It's still really good, and you don't even notice the difference in the second half of the ride. But when this thing flew over the top where you were getting crazy ejector cresting that hill and into the first drop, there was a very noticeable difference to the point where I could not believe that this ride was that good. And like I said, I still love this coaster to bits. The way it uses the terrain is like nothing else. The quad down, holy crap, going down the mountain. The ride gets faster and faster each time, and it ends with a bang where you hit the brake run and you're like, oh my gosh, that just happened. It is so intense, so fast paced. It's a shame that it's had so many technical issues the past few years, because in my opinion, this is my favorite roller coaster. So that is how I rank my 25 favorite roller coasters. As you can see, there are a ton of rides that did not make this list. That does not mean they are bad roller coasters. There are still plenty of roller coasters out there that I would give a 10 out of 10. But when you've got over 700 roller coasters on your list, it is tough to figure out what is the best. And unfortunately, there just isn't enough room for everything. Again, the type of rides I enjoy are probably going to be different from the type of rides that you enjoy. So all I ask is that you respect my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. In fact, I encourage you to go out and form your own opinion. Figure out what your 25 favorite roller coasters are, which are probably very different than mine, and that is totally okay. If we all had the same opinion in this world, then videos like this would be irrelevant. No one would care, and maybe you still don't, but I thought I would share how I rank my favorite roller coasters I've ridden. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios. If you haven't watched all of the individual reviews of these rides, they're all available in a playlist on my channel organized in alphabetical order, so be sure to go check those out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.